Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome to this week's episode of Steelers Touch Down Under. I'm Matty Peverell, joined as always, not by my co-host this week. I'm joined by Shannon White, BTSC's very own Shannon White. You might have read his articles on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, your one-stop shop for all things Pittsburgh Steelers. You might listen to him on The Hangover. Shannon, welcome to your Touchdown Under debut.
Hey, Matty, I'm just happy to be here. This is an honor and a privilege to be on with the Matty P.
Thank you very much. No, I'm looking forward to it. It's been one that we've wanted for a little while now, but Mark couldn't be here today, and I know he's keen to get you on as well. But I think it's an interesting one for us and for our live listeners as well across YouTube and Facebook, and then also for those on the audio side. And we've got a really loyal audio following here. This started out as an audio-only show as well, but there's some very different accents that you're going to be hearing on this show between you and I. So I think it's a really nice representation of how global the Steelers are. Mm-hmm. But what have you been up to on your Saturday, Shannon?
Well, I've been watching my West Virginia Mountaineers basketball team get slaughtered. And like I was telling you earlier, it's every team I like right now in any sport sucks on offense. And it makes it very frustrating and difficult to watch. I had to go through it with the Steelers, and now the Mountaineers, they can't score either. So, but that's part of being a fan, the ups and downs.
That's it. But we had a really big up the last couple of days as Steelers fans. I guess, being able to have TJ Watt declared Defensive Player of the Year. I've got the Salute to Service TJ on today for those listening live, and those on the audio now, you know what I'm talking about. But Shannon, what was your thought when he finally got that? I mean, for me, like 2019, I was like, come on. 2020, I understood it with Aaron Donald. But how are you feeling when you heard TJ finally got it?
Well, first I was thinking it's about time. Then when JJ come out, and I said he was going to be the presenter, he's been very outspoken about TJ should have already won one. So yeah. I'm like, you're not going to bring him out to present the award and not give it to TJ. So I thought that it was very emotional between them when they got to hug each other. And they are, what genetics in that family? I mean, how many brothers could say that they've both won a Defensive Player of the Year award? So I was so happy for TJ. He's earned it. He deserved it. And then he comes up here and says, this just motivates me more. And that bodes well for the Steelers in the future.
100%. It's also something quite unique about having brothers on the same team. We've had that with the Edmonds. We've had that with a few. And it's funny for Mark and I because one of the rugby teams that we support here in Australia are known for having brothers, and they've had like all-star level players as brothers. So it's kind of funny when you get this sort of, and I think it adds to that family unit on the team. But it's Derek's in an interesting position, but we might get there later in the show as well. But yeah, for me, I agree with you. Like the emotion to have, JJ come out and announce that hug that they have. TJ didn't need to say a hell of a lot. I thought, and I always love that, it just makes me more motivated, going forward. I think, and it was funny because I heard one of the interviews with TJ at the Pro Bowl, and they said, oh, how does it feel to be in another Pro Bowl? And he said, well, it's not that great because it means I'm not in the game next week. And it's just that attitude. And, we've talked a lot on this show over the last few weeks around a little bit around culture and mentality. And I know that's something that's been quite consistent across a lot of the BTSC shows, and something that, you often talk to in the BTSC Slack channel as well. But, does that give you a bit of confidence with some of the way that he's talking in terms of that leadership now that we aren't going to have, Big Ben in the locker room?
The funny thing is you got a guy like Watt who had a record tying year, even though he did it in less games when you consider the games that he missed and then the games he didn't play the full game because of those groin injuries. To me, he broke the record, but we'll leave it at that. But
agree.
When you have a guy that's that great, who's motivated, nobody has to say anything to him. The coaches don't have to say, hey, you work on this. The exit interview is real easy. He's so dedicated and driven. Then you have a guy like and I've got an article coming up about this, Devin Bush, who towards the end of the year, he's saying, I think I'm doing all right. I think I'm doing, good enough. I'm it ain't my fault. That is the opposite of what TJ is. TJ's trying to take responsibility when when he was out there, they could win. When he wasn't out there, they didn't win. That's as simple as that.
Yeah.
That shows you the different mindsets between the two players. And that's why one player is Defensive Player of the Year, and hopefully one day will be a champion, because you build your championship teams around guys like that. And the other guy I'm ready to move on from, but that's a topic for another show, I guess.
Well, no, it actually is a really good segue into the topic of the show today. So, there's that classic, and it's a real, biblical saying around, not building a house on sand and building a house on rock and a solid foundation. And, I sat there playing with words around steel, but it kind of doesn't go in what the saying actually is, or almost the proverb, if you like, that it is building your house on rock. And so, it's funny. There's going to be a lot of shows. There's been a lot of shows. There's going to be a lot of shows, whether it's on BTSC or other, networks that some of our listeners might, be sort of listening to around who they need to get in the draft and who they need to get into free agency. And I think what often is missed is that the two, go together like hand in glove, and there might be players you miss out on, in free agency that choose somewhere else because they like the city better. It might be better deal, might be better incentives, might be a little bit more money. They might be like JuJu and choose to stay with the team that they've been with, and go for another year. Like the Green Bay Packers might be a team. Devontae Adams might be in a similar situation, or they get tagged or what have you. And so then you've got to go fill that need in the draft. Equally, there are other teams that probably sit there hedging their bets on the draft, and then you see that second wave of free agency come about as well. But obviously, you've probably talked about this on a couple of your shows. There's articles that you've written, particularly since the season ended, and there's articles that you're going to be writing and have in mind. Today, where we sit, because I'm sure there might be some change, there might not be, but what are the two positions that you think are the biggest needs today that would see a remarkable change in the Steelers, like might get them 2 extra wins?
Well, quarterback is going to be. I've said that I'd like to see them get a bridge quarterback, somebody with experience like a Mariota, Trubisky, and then if there's a quarterback they feel strongly about, not throwing him right into the fire, because they have so many needs at the moment.
Yeah.
But when you've talked, I'm all about the foundation of a football team.
Yeah.
The foundation starts, I think, with ownership. It starts with the culture, from the front office. And then it starts with your offensive and defensive lines.
Yep.
And you build from there. The Steelers, they have the Rooneys, but Dan Rooney took over. Then they hired Chuck Noll. And then they drafted the most influential Steeler of all time, the foundation of the franchise, in Mean Joe Green. The Steelers don't want to say we're in rebuilding mode. And I know they don't want people to think, well, we're going to be okay winning 4 or 5 games.
Yeah.
But you have to accept that this rebuild is going to take at least 2 seasons.
Yeah.
You might be more competitive in that second season, but if you look at that roster, talent-wise, from top to bottom, they got like 2 guys on defense, 3 with Fitzpatrick, and a couple of guys on offense, and that's it as far as guys that they can depend on moving forward. Yeah. They need a huge influx of talent. Yeah. Now, they have free agency and they have the draft. But to me, they have to focus. The 2 main things is, I don't know if I want to say center, guard, tackle, because they could use one of each. But they have to strengthen that line in free agency and the draft. And I would like to see a difference maker at the inside linebacker, whether it's Buck or Mac, because I think we need both, because, again, how I feel about Bush. So, to me, it would be an offensive lineman and a middle linebacker.
So this is an interesting thing, right? Because, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think I've started to, it's probably Andrew Wilbar and I and Michael Beck are probably the ones that are biggest on the draft, I think from BTSC as well. And I'm not saying that, bad or what have you, but we probably get it. We definitely get into it earlier than a lot of people, right? And I think it's funny. I've been talking for a little while around. I'd much rather a proven performer at cornerback, a decently young cornerback. So, sort of 27, 28, nothing older. Someone that you can sign on a 2 or 3 year deal and make it worth it and spread the hit that it's going to cost you next year. And for a left tackle like an Armstead, I trust that more than a draft tackle. And Andrew Wilbar interestingly said to me on Slack over the last couple of days, he's not really that fond of the tackle class either outside the top few guys, like I was telling you before we went on air. So for me, I'm looking at it and going, well, who are the top tackles that are available? And it's not that great. There's not that great a number of tackles that are available in free agency. And I talked about that on my War Room show this week. There's a lot of good interior offensive linemen in this draft. That's really solid. There's depth going through into the 5th round, like what you saw last year. Center is a bit 50-50. There's a couple of top guys in free agency, but you're going to have to pay. And so I think it's interesting. And then when you talk about inside linebacker, obviously you had a great article that came out this week. I did a profile on the same player in War Room in Chad Mumar out of Wyoming. But I also think around some of the inside linebackers that might be available, in free agency as well. And I think it's quite interesting because last year you had a player in Denzel Perryman become available. And he was someone that a few people had talked about. The Raiders went after him. He ended up having a Pro Bowl year. He was 29, and a lot of people weren't that big fans on Perryman, but he can hit someone. So I think if we were sitting here today with the salary cap that available that the Steelers are going to have, and you talk about those 2 big needs, if you had to pick the draft to fill one of those needs and free agency to pick the other, which would you pick for those positions?
I don't know if you've seen our last Steelers hangover, but I think they have, with the amount of cap space they have, and I believe they want to try to extend Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
So I think they could make one substantial signing on offense and defense.
Yep.
On defense, I've already said J.C. Jackson, the cornerback from the Patriots. Yep. He's the right age, like you talked about. He's made the Pro Bowl. He's a guy that you can just put on that side, he will cover whoever. You don't have to put extra help on his side and coverage. And the Steelers have got to change their philosophy of coverage. This playing in between, not pressing and then also not going full zone, it's not working. They're just getting torched with regularity. So I guess Jackson would be my top priority on defense. Also, like you was talking about inside linebacker, you have Vander Bosch, who's on the market, and you have Rashad Evans, 2 guys that the Steelers were really interested in, and they weren't able to get neither one of them. And then, so of course, the next year they traded up for Bush. Those 2 guys are now available. Vander Bosch, looked like he was going to be a stud when his rookie year. But then, of course, he's a taller guy, and he has a really long neck, and something I know nothing about. And he suffered that neck injury. So it's kind of set him back a little bit. But he started to look more like himself last year. We don't know what the cost would be, though. So that would be an issue. And Evans never has become what I think a lot of people thought he would be. I mean, he's solid, but he's not special. So maybe that would affect both of those guys' price ranges and keep them, in line to what the Steelers are looking for.
Yeah, and I think you bring up 2 really great examples there, particularly when you think about Evans from the Titans, because Jayon Brown's also up. So they're going to have to spend money on one of those guys, right? So, and I wouldn't mind seeing Brown as well in our team as well. So I think this is the interesting thing. And I think the other thing I've said to Mark recently as well in this show is that there's still a lot of coaching hires. Now, obviously, there are a lot of coaching hires that have been settled this week, but there are the coaching staffs that have got to come in with a lot of these coaches. There's still some GM moves being made. There have been some changes in GM. What a lot of people would have said, this team will go after this person in the draft 3 or 6 months ago. That's going to change. And you and I talked about how much they'll change to the combine, and we'll get there a little bit later in the show. But it's going to be very interesting to see even how that shifts things, because if we take the Raiders, for example, with Mayock, right? Like he always likes to pick from some of the top schools. That's why you saw Leatherwood go at 17 last year, when a lot of people felt he was a second round pick at left tackle. So I think that's interesting. I guess when we talk about the Steelers and these positions, as you said, building from those foundations, what do you think that the inside linebacker position, as you've talked about there, or that center position, is going to have? Which one of those is going to have a bigger impact on this team's prospects next season?
Well, as you've talked, I'm not ready to give up on Green yet. If he has a full offseason, he dedicates himself to position-specific training, core strength, functional strength. He's working with Marquise Pouncey, which, who better to learn from? If you look at some of the guys who've been very successful with the Steelers, they learn from, as I say, at the foot of Ramon Foster, or they learn, from Smith or DeCastro, not just technique, but what it means to be a Steeler and what was expected of them at that position. So I'm not ready to give up on Green, but the center position was so bad this year.
Yeah.
Green, people don't understand, making a position switch at the highest level is a lot to ask for anybody. But a center is almost – the center and the quarterback handle the ball every play.
Yeah.
The center has to be confident. He has to be, I think, the leader of that line. And the Steelers have been so lucky to have that down through the years, 4 decades worth. And I think a center, like I said, if they would have took Creed Humphrey, I think he would have stabilized the line, would have worked well with Dotson, and even maybe help Turner some, instead of Turner trying to help Green, who was very green, very raw at the position. So I think that the line, regardless of what happens, my main focus is on getting that line back to respectable, and then looking into the next year maybe of being special. But they have to solidify that line, because you're hopeful that you're going to at least get a Lulu back on the defensive line. And we don't know about Tuitt, but you can't count on him at all because we don't know. So, but they have some options there and free agency options. But again, strengthen both of them lines, and I think it'll make the biggest difference.
Yeah, so there's a few things. I don't want to lose my train of thought, because I think there's 3 things that I want to ask you out of that. I think, or 3 points and 2 questions. So I think the first one is you bring up Tuitt, which is interesting, and I want to go into him a little bit later on. But I think, for Tuitt, if he doesn't come back with the cap savings there and the cuts that other teams are going to have to make, personally, I'm really not worried. I think they're going to get someone that can do, who might not be completely at the same level, but will make up a big difference. I'm less worried about that. And I'm sure if you threw the right pick at, the Eagles, you'd end up with Fletcher Cox really quickly, which I'd love. I'm a big fan of Fletcher Cox, but there are other players as well. But anyway, I think that's from similar to it. But the two that you talk about there with Creed Humphrey, that's an interesting one, I think, as well, because there was so much flux on our offensive line. Would Creed Humphrey have had the same year with the Steelers that he had with the Chiefs? I think is an interesting question. But putting that aside, Steelers pick number 20 right now. In an ideal world, I'd love to be trading back, because I just think you can end up with more, and you can trade back 4 or 5 spots and end up with more picks. And I want to talk about that. We're going to go deep into that with some scenarios later on in the show. But you're sitting there at 20, assuming you don't trade back because Colbert's only done it once. Devin Lloyd's on the board from Utah, or Tyler Linderbaum's there from, I think it's Iowa State. Center or linebacker, who are you picking? And you might not even pick either of them, but if I force you into picking one of the 2 guys, who are you picking?
Yeah, well, again, we've talked about this. I love Linderbaum, his tenacity, his technique. He's got excellent core strength. I don't know if you've seen the video of him throwing hay bales.
Yeah.
If you've ever thrown any hay bales, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But I worry that he's going to have some of the similar issues that Green had his rookie year, because they say he's legit 290. Now, if he gains to say 315, where Green, I think, finished the year around in that area, will he still be as mobile? Will he still be the same player at a heavier weight? Because I don't think he's going to be that tall either. I think he's going to be, closer to Green's height than, let's say, 6'5". So I think that when we'll see a lot at the combine, we'll learn his arm measurements, different things. That isn't as big an issue for a center, but when you go from college to the pros and you have this behemoth in front of you that have the incredible explosiveness that they do, you're trying to snap that ball, and before you can get your head up, they're all over you. And you see what it did to Green. He ended up on his backside more than he was on his feet. So if I had to say which guy was the safer pick and who I would pick if I was GM, I would say Lloyd.
Awesome. I'd be the same. I mean, what I've seen Devin Lloyd do on tape. I mean, you and I talk about rumor, but if Devin Lloyd's sitting there, I mean, 5-year deal for an inside linebacker, he's probably equal to what, or probably even better, as a prospect than what, Bush was coming out, and he's sitting there at 20. I think that's a pretty incredible opportunity there. And it's funny, for me, all offseason we've talked about the offensive line, but every time he's sitting there on the board, or there's a top cornerback sitting there on the board, I end up I'm picking them in a mock draft, right? Like it's just this defense that you can't. People kind of prefer one or the other, and I think even Steeler fans that love offense more than defense, there's just this rich history that we have on defense that there's an appreciation for it, right? And then you think about not just like with the situation we've had with Ben over the last couple of years, but we're going to have probably in a bridge quarterback or a Mason Rudolph, and we'll park that one there. But the ability to stop points and the ability to stop momentum in the run. And then you look at the AFC North and how run heavy it is. Yes, obviously it all starts with that defensive line. But for me, how they figure out inside linebacker is going to be really interesting. And I think the person that we didn't really get to talk much about, although we didn't get to see much, and I think sort of fallen away from the conversation, but you interestingly brought him up in the BTSC Slack channel in the last 3 or 4 days, is Buddy Johnson. We don't know how much Buddy Johnson's developed. We don't know completely what that fit looks like. We don't know how high the Steelers necessarily are on him. This is the big question mark at that inside linebacker position. And we talk about a foundation. I mean, is there anything through the season that's made you lean either, for or against, Buddy Johnson? Where do you see his future going in 2022?
One thing you mentioned, defense travels. It doesn't matter what stadium. Defense travels, and defense can keep you in games.
Yeah.
And the Steelers didn't have it this year. Somebody was talking about, they had the 9th ranked pass cover defense or whatever, but it's because the people running will on them. They didn't have to pass. And so, that's misleading. Stats can oftentimes do that.
Right.
I like Buddy Johnson. I was really impressed with him at training camp and in the preseason, because I believe he's a true Buck linebacker.
Yep.
But he has better mobility if you look at his numbers.
Yes.
On here at the combine or at the the pro day. We didn't have the combine, but he has better speed than people give him credit for. More explosive. Look at his vertical and his shuttle times. So I think he has the potential to be better in coverage than he might have showed when he was in college. And we haven't had that at the Buck position. Because Schobert is not a Buck linebacker, not even close.
No, he's not.
They had 2 Mac linebackers at best in him and Bush, which you never want to have. That's a terrible combination. And everybody says, well, there's really not a difference. Well, there is a difference. And in a perfect world, you have a Vince Williams type guy who's a thumper, a run stopper. If he could have a little bit of coverage ability where Vince didn't have any, that would go a long way to help your defense. I love to watch White and David at Tampa Bay.
Yep.
Those two guys are phenomenal in the inside of the middle of the field. They take everything away. They're always on their toes. They're attacking forward. They can do it all. You got inside backers like Warner, and of course, I compared Amuma to Luke Kuechly in ways.
I love Kuechly.
Yeah, and also all these guys were kind of like Jack Lambert back in my day. Is that they stay on their toes? Some of them are chopping their feet, but they're playing downhill, but they still have the lateral movement and the smoothness and instincts to quickly drop into coverage. And so that's the kind of thing that I think if we could get a strong MAC guy who is not allergic to contact like Bush became this year, not trying to run around the blocks or get caught up in the wash because he's just blindly running in there. If you could get the right guy at MAC and then let Buddy Johnson give you that extra mobility and hopefully coverage ability, I think you really got something. But the Steelers' defense is such, they do not want to start rookies at inside linebacker. They say it's too complicated. It's, they're not playing instinctual. They're thinking too much. And when he did get in there, you've seen a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But if you have to, with the salary cap and the way things are now, you have a limited window. So you got to use these guys. You got to push them in there, even if it's for a few plays each game to help them gain confidence to get more comfortable. And if your defense that hard to learn, you need to simplify it a little bit.
Well, I completely agree with you because
you got to use the guys you have on your roster.
Well, that's it. Like there's a common saying we have in the rugby circles, over here about playing what's in front of you. And I've talked about it with Mark before about sometimes you see these players that have got so many X's and O's running through their head. And at the end of the day, if a guy's running at you and there's another, everyone else has taken their man, he's yours to tackle. Like there's nothing more complex than that. Like, and run into space and, hit holes and those sorts of things. And sometimes it's just, you see it on tape and you're like, what is running through their head when they're faced with some of these issues?
It's like paralysis by overanalysis.
Exactly.
And you watch Green go through that towards the end of the year, and you've seen other defenders for the Steelers go through that. Because if you're overthinking, a lot of times you end up doing nothing. You try to do too much, and you don't do anything in the end. So,
yeah, it's. I agree with you though on Buddy Johnson and that movement. It's something that showed up to me after they drafted him, and you watch some of that tape, and you're like, oh, he probably could do a bit more. So I think you hit the nail on the head. And you talked about Levante David and the other Devin White from Tampa Bay. Devondre Campbell's available through free agency as well, and I think he's very much a cheaper version of what they offer too. So perhaps that's an interesting one for the Steelers when you compare that to Schobert. I want to go on a bit of a different tact. We've talked a bit of defense. Obviously, the wide receiver positions come up this week, and there's chat around, trading Claypool and Deontay Johnson's deal, and everyone's got an opinion on the wide receivers. But we talked about building the foundation, and you look at our AFC North rival that's sitting there, about to play in the Super Bowl tomorrow. Whether it's tomorrow for you guys over there in the States or tomorrow for me over here in Australia on my Monday. But it's interesting because they've chosen to go a bit of a different way, and they've built around some wide receivers. There was that first round pick, obviously, in Jamar Chase, which looks good now. Didn't look good through the preseason and the start of the season versus picking Sewell. Right now with the wide receivers where they're sitting with the Steelers, how big a need do you think this is both, and how would you like that addressed over free agency in the draft? And the second part to that question is, would you like to see them re-sign JuJu?
JuJu come back, I believe, for two reasons. One, I don't think he got the offer that he was really wanting as far as the years, and he really wanted to play with Ben one more year. I think JuJu really admires and loves the Steeler franchise, and I'm a big fan of JuJu. But I think that he's not a wide receiver one.
No.
He could be more effective in a more explosive offense, who's going to throw the ball down the field, down the seams more than the Steelers definitely did this past couple of seasons. And so, for his sake, and for his opportunity to play in a Super Bowl somewhere down the line, and I part of me wants him to go and sign with somebody where he'll be able to be more effective. The other part is he's so young still that he might be able to still be in his prime years by the time hopefully the Steelers do find their next franchise quarterback. Because I'm sure that's going to be a huge focus for a while. The wide receiver core right now, to me, doesn't have a wide receiver one at all. No. Johnson, I was so proud of Johnson because he cut his drops way back for the first 15 games.
Yep.
And I wrote articles. I was bragging on him, like he's really worked so hard. And he did. He worked so hard, know. But to be the wide receiver one, you got to be clutch. There's no other word to use. The big time players come up big at the big moments. And he didn't do that. Whether it's just dropping the ball, running in the Kansas City game, or 2 drops in the first 3 drives in the playoff game that could have kept the drive going. One, he might have took it to the house if he would have caught it. AB, as much as I, hate to say anything really good about him, but he come through in those situations. He was clutch. Hines Ward, San Antonio Holmes.
There's
been tons of them guys, but we don't have that right now.
And that's what I mean, though, in like a Jamar Chase as well, right? Like, Jamar Chase came out, all that criticism. He doesn't drop balls, right? But it's different. It's just this different mentality, and that's why I think it's interesting where some people say Deontay Johnson's not good enough to be a number one. I agree with you. I think he's really done the work. You see it before every game. He's out there with the tennis ball, and I've heard he does even a golf ball and what have you. But there's a mentality there, and that's the question mark for me is, does he have the mentality? Does he have that killer instinct that we talk about with like an AB and the San Antonio Holmes and even a Mike Wallace to some degree? Like, does he have that there, right? And that's what I wonder about in terms of a long-term deal for him. Anyway, I wanted to keep hearing how you're thinking about the wide receiver.
Well, I'm glad you said that because it's not just performance; it's mentality. Like we talked about earlier, comparing T.J. Watt to Devin Bush.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the year, when he started to struggle on social media, he tried to defend himself, and he kind of come at the fans who, openly criticized the drops, which, you have to have a certain mentality, a certain strength to be able to take criticism. And especially if you're going to pay attention to it, if you're going to be that number one wide receiver, then you go to Chase Claypool, who has incredible size, but plays like he's 5'9", because he's trying to catch balls at his waist. And he loves to jump. And like I've said, he's a leap and leaner. He leans back and he tries to catch it right here. And he doesn't know how to high point the ball. I would love to see him get with, a lot of these guys work out together in the off season. I'd love to see him get with a guy like T. Higgins for the Bengals, or Larry Fitzgerald if he would work with him, or any of these guys who knew.
I'd like to see him even just work with Freiermuth. I mean, Freiermuth kind of catching
exactly. Freiermuth catches anything gets near him. He just needs, to work on that. But last offseason, I think he was distracted. I think that the success he had might have distracted him a little bit. And so I'm hoping this offseason he's going to get the help. Like you see Green, straight to Pouncey. I don't know what he's doing right now, but I hope he's working on that. Because then you got a lot of question marks. At one time, it looked like the Steelers were 5 deep at receiver, and now you got 2 guys. You don't have a wide receiver 1. You've got 2 guys that can definitely be wide receiver 2 or 3 in whatever order. But they need more talent there. They got to have somebody to take the top off of defense. They got to get some speed. All the top units have speed. or guys who at least, like you look at Cooper Kupp, I don't even know what he run in the 40, but he sets up defense backs and he gets wide open, including, down the seam. So you don't have to run a 4-3 to get open deep.
No.
But he's kind of obviously a special outliner there, but they need to find that speed guy. And they need somebody, as you was talking earlier, if they get a young quarterback, you want somebody that they could grow together.
Yeah.
That's what the Bengals did. They knew that Burrow had that relationship with Chase, and when they had the opportunity, they pulled the trigger.
Well, and I completely agree with you. And as you said there, speed, we need the speed, and there's no taking away from that. But even you look at like a John Ross that the Bengals had, right? One of the fastest guys to ever become in the league. What's he doing now? Nothing with the Giants, right? So it's not everything. But this is what's interesting with JuJu, because number one, I think there are a few things that float around my head, which are that if you've got Mason Rudolph, he's got familiarity with JuJu, and I think if you are literally, if that is what their plan is right now, if they can't find a way to keep JuJu, and I think, and I've said in the Slack channel, stick by my man, my word. I think JuJu on $6 million base, $2 million for incentives, $1 million for 1,000 yards, $1 million for the 8 touchdowns or more, which I don't think he's going to get either with Mason. So it's a $6 million deal for me. Why not? Because of how much flux is in this room. But I think you brought up a good point there about youth as well. Is there I would love to see this situation of maturity from the Steelers where they sit down with JuJu, and it's got to be team friendly, because who knows what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years, and it's got to be friendly for him too if we don't find that quarterback. But do you say to JuJu, all right, yeah, I think he's 25 this year or 24. We're going to bring you back on a 5-6 year deal. We're going to give you a bit up front, so you're going to get a nice healthy number for 2 years with a good bonus there, good signing bonus, good roster bonuses and what have you. We might give you some roster bonuses in your last couple of years as well. But we're seeing this as a long-term thing, not a 2 or 3 year thing. We want you for the long haul. We want someone that can be a bedrock of that wide receiver room. I don't think even, JuJu sitting there thinking he's wide receiver number 1, but, it'd be a great 2A, or he's, it's funny when we say wide receiver number 1, for me, it's like, definitely a playmaker, can do anything. He's going to score you, 10 touchdowns a season. It's going to break 1,000 yards. But in some ways, for me, JuJu's a number 1 in that he's a go-to, and you saw that with Ben. Like, he delivers in clutch the way, there's balls that Deontay's dropped at key moments that JuJu doesn't drop those balls. So it's funny when we talk about, wide receiver number 1, and what do we mean by wide receiver number 1? To me, if you could sit down there with JuJu and have that discussion and you can work on something like that, I would love to see them keep him. But if he's thinking he's going to get 3 or 4 year deal on $11 million, no way. But this is what's interesting as well about the 20th pick, right? Because, and there was an article today in NFL about 5 teams that, should actually draft a wide receiver. The Steelers weren't one of them. And I think it would send some or most Steelers fans who'd be pretty incensed if they picked a wide receiver with the 20th pick. But if you get and as I say, there are a lot of teams with a lot of needs before us, and they're not wide receiver. Particularly teams that are picking with 2 or 3 picks in the first round. Like Philadelphia has a lot of wide receivers. They got 3 picks in the teens. If someone like a Chris Olave or a Garrett Wilson is sitting there at 20, and we factor in a 5-year deal with them as well, do you pull the trigger on that? Does that factor into your decision? Because right now, you don't necessarily have Ray back. You don't have JuJu back. You don't have James Washington back. What do you do if there's those 2 guys sitting on the board there?
I've always said, we all like to say best player available.
Yeah.
Every year. And the problem is that's not really accurate, because let's say that you're the Bengals and the best player available is a quarterback. You don't need a quarterback. So it has to be best player available at a position of need. The good thing about the Steelers, and it's also the bad thing, is they have needs everywhere. Now, I believe that some needs are bigger than others, like we've talked about. Offensive line, defensive line, cornerback, inside linebacker.
Yeah.
Wide receiver would not be priority for me. But if you have a chance to get a guy that you really believe is generational, and you're in complete rebuild mode, which I believe the Steelers are, it would be hard not to pull that trigger.
Yeah, and this is what I mean, because I've noticed some things in some mocks changing, and I love the way you said that about best player available. I was thinking of similar lines a couple of days ago. I was sitting there, and I'd done a few mock drafts in a row, and I kind of sat there and was scratching my head like I am now. I'm going, it's kind of hard when you see best player available, because there's some really good talent in this draft that is going to be, that in other drafts just purely wouldn't be sitting where it is right now. And so it's a really interesting discussion there. And, you know, and you talked about that with a good example of the quarterback. You talk about it with, they picked Jamar Chase because he's the best player on the board for them, because he's got the relationship with Joey Burrow. And, you know, even I sat there at the time going, that is ridiculous. You've just let your quarterback, you know, who you think's generational, you know, smack his ACL in, and now he's coming back. And how could you do that? How could you not give him an offensive lineman? And look at what Jamar Chase has done for them.
I thought it was crazy. I thought they were crazy. I really did. Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. Right. So it is interesting. And, you know, people put up there's talent around 6 or 7. The wide receivers are interesting for me where I'm sitting right now. There's great talent in the 2nd and 3rd round as well. Then there's great talent 6th round and later. In the middle, though, I worry. Like, if the Steelers pick a wide receiver at 3 or 4, and obviously the Steelers know more than we do, or we'd be in their position, but like, they better be good. Like, if we saw another, you know, Deontay Johnson out of Toledo pick this sort of year in round 3 or round 4, I'd be livid at that point in time, because I think there's a real gap in where the value sits right now and what they need. But, you know, it is an interesting one with this wide receiver room, because, you know, we all talk about the quarterback, but they got to throw the ball to someone. Right now, even if this team runs through Najee Harris, right, they've got to throw the ball to someone, and it is a really interesting sort of piece. But you are on Steelers Touch Down Under, and so each week, Mark and I have a Sling and the Slain segment that we like to sort of talk a few things Australia. So I've got a few questions for you on some Australian slang. You don't have to attempt to pronounce it, but I want to hear you have a guess with that. But it is Super Bowl week. And so what I thought I would share, it's an interesting one for the Super Bowl in Australia for us, because, you know, a lot of people might be surprised to know this, but, and maybe it's because I went to an all-boys school, but ever since grade 7, Super Bowl, because obviously Super Bowl is on a Monday for us, on Monday lunchtime, well, most teachers would actually put it on a TV in the classroom, and we would actually have the Super Bowl on the background during class. And I remember I had a double period in, I think, grade 10, and my geography teacher, who was an NFL fan, but he took it upon himself to put the whole game on, and then happened to look after us over lunch as well, so we could sit there and watch almost the whole game. But it's very funny, you know, how big a footprint the Super Bowl has. And I don't know, like, if it was on a Monday in America, how many schools would let you sit there watch the Super Bowl?
I doubt it. It's funny. We, as a person of faith, and you was talking about building things on a foundation.
Yeah.
Growing up, you know, you had church services at night.
Yeah.
On Sunday night, and so you know, for the time I was little, I was like, can I stay home and watch the Super Bowl? and you know, they said, well, you know, your faith's up to you, you know, and you make that decision. And it didn't affect my faith, but I wanted to watch the Super Bowl. So while you know, at your time, you'd have been in class in school, I stayed home to watch the Super Bowl, because it's once a year. I mean, you know.
Well, that's it. Like,
I don't see it. The schools letting kids out or early or whatever to watch the Super Bowl, unless you're in Cincinnati, which, you know, that if they've canceled school on Monday.
Yeah, right.
Already, because they want to, I guess they're hoping for that, you know, Super Bowl celebration, and they want the kids to be able to watch it, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't want them staying up late watching it and then having to get up and go to school the next day.
Well, I always think it's funny that it's not a national holiday for you guys. In fact, we have the AFL in Australia, the Aussie Rules Football, which was originally Victorian football. It was capital cities, Melbourne. They recently changed one of their public holidays to be the Monday after their version of the Super Bowl, the AFL Grand Final, so that people could take it. And they already have the Friday off because they have a big parade in Melbourne and all the rest of it and what have you. So they all have a 4-day weekend for their version of the Super Bowl now in that state. So it's an interesting prospect. But I also, as someone with a bit of faith myself, I wonder whether the Super Bowl is a time when the Lord is definitely filled with a few prayers. There might be a few more prayers going on in living rooms than there are in some churches.
It's funny. I always tell people I've never prayed over a sporting event because there's more important things that I'm going to pray over. I have prayed over the safety and the well-being of the participants, because I think that's something worth praying over. But I've never prayed for a certain team to win, even the Steelers. Of course, I'm also not a gambler, so I'm sure there's a lot of people who's got money on this, and they're going to be like, please, please, please.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that. I think that's a bit. You're like praying for a win on in that situation, but that's a good one. Well, I want to get back to talking Steelers because we don't have a lot of time left in the show, so you're going to have to come back on with Mark and I, and then we can challenge you with some Aussie slang from there. But I think the burning question that sat with me as we've been talking, and I do like to freestyle this a little bit, is there a position of right now amongst the Steelers? Because we talked a lot about needs there, right? And you talked about there's so many needs. Is there one position that you would be, would make steam come out of your ears if the Steelers actually did draft in that position? Not free agency. I think free agency offers values in its own right with guys. But is there a position on this roster right now where if they draft that at any point in this draft, let's say in the first five rounds, and I know they don't have a 5th round pick, but they could trade back in whatever they did last year. What position is that?
Part of me wanted to say edge, because of Watt and Highsmith. But you can never have enough top edge guys. And there's a certain amount of talent, and then it drops off. Yeah. I think middle linebacker is much stronger. But edge is you got your top guys, and then there's a huge drop. But for me, the weakest position in this draft is running back. Now, understand when I say that, I'm not saying there's not any good running backs, but there isn't any generational running backs.
Yeah.
So these guys could be had. Some of them's going to fall. Guys that could really help the team, and they're going to fall into the 5th, 6th, 7th round, or even go undrafted. So I do not think that the Steelers need to pull the trigger on running back for that reason, and also until they strengthen the line, you really don't know what you have at running back.
Yeah.
I mean, Harris was breaking tackles in the backfield to get 2 and 3 yard runs. I mean, his determination effort was without question.
Yeah.
Not every guy has that kind of talent.
No.
And it doesn't mean that Snell, Balaj, these guys can't play in the pros, but you don't know what you got when the line's as bad as the Steelers were last year.
Well, imagine McFarland behind a decent line. I mean, once he doesn't trip over his own toes, we give him some time not to trip over his own toes. He's just trying to find a way to move, and get the outside zone going. And, you never know, right? And that's the other thing. You draft McFarland, but you're playing a lot of inside zone. And I know you play some of that in college, but you're like, that speed, you're not running off the tackle. That's a whole different, we could probably sit here for an hour and talk about that in itself. And then we probably need, I'm sure KT Smith and Jeffrey Benedict and Dave Schofield would love to be in that conversation as well. Is there a position that no one's talking about that you would like to see drafted? Because I'm with you all the way on running back.
I guess because we don't know what's going to happen with Edmonds. And there is some really strong candidates in those first 3 rounds, in my opinion, at strong safety. And if Edmonds doesn't come back, you can't go into it with Killebrew next year. No. If they sign him back, he can't start. So they're going to have to either go free agency or strong safety. So all that's going to depend on Edmonds. But there is some talent there. The kid out of Baylor, I don't know how to say his last name.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm getting it wrong, but like Peter, I think it is. But like
Petrie.
Yeah.
Then there's that Smith kid out of Georgia Tech.
Yep.
There's certain guys that in these all-star games. Now, again, the combine hasn't taken place.
Yeah.
The pros haven't taken place. But they looked really impressive and would look like maybe good fits. So that's something that I think you don't hear anybody hardly talking about, but strong safety is going to be a big one.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I talked about in War Room this week. There's not a lot of guys in free agency. There's actually not. And if you're looking at that, Edmonds is kind of pretty much the best one, unless you're going to lay out a heap of money for Tyrann Mathieu, and then I don't know how well that really fits with Fitzpatrick. And this is. It's kind of sat there with me for a little while, and people challenge me on it in terms of the coverage schemes, but I think the Steelers, particularly Terryl Austin, can work it out. But if Minka was open to doing more, now this is the thing, everyone talks about the fact that, you know, he wanted out of, you know, Miami and he didn't want to do all the things they were asking him to do. I think he wanted out of Miami because he didn't want to be in the dysfunction that's clearly there, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if half the allegations that have been made are correct, I mean, that's just ridiculous. And I hate to see a young coach like Mike McDaniel over there. You know, I don't hope that doesn't ruin what he has as a really promising coaching career. But, you know, it's interesting because there are some good people at free safety in this draft. There's some good people at free safety in free agency. Are there people that are good tacklers that you can get Minka doing a little bit of strong safety and, you know, have these two sort of hybrid sort of roles? I'd be really interested to know what are those conversations that are going on with the Steelers, because that, you know, we talk about letting the team get better. If there is some openness there and some flexibility, you know, we could really see an up level in our safety play. But it's interesting. I'm glad to hear that you've got some faith in some of the strong safeties in this draft. I worry a little bit about their weight. I think there's some smaller guys than what Edmonds is. And so for me, yeah, I kind of sit there and think you need to bring Edmonds back. I don't think wouldn't like to see anything more than a 3-year deal, but I think 2 years is too little. But yeah, it's an interesting one because even a guy like Briscoe, who's available, who I think is more of a free safety, but I think he's like 200 pounds. He's sitting there at the top of the second. So if you trade back and you've got multiple twos and you don't bring back Edmonds, that gives you, you know, and then same as the guy from Baylor, you know, he's predicted to be there in that second, you know, early in the second as well, or very late first. Again, you can trade back and you can get more picks to get a guy like that. Interestingly for me, it's actually tight end is one for me that I don't think is on a lot of people's radar. You know, Ebron's gone as far as I'm concerned. Yes, you have Freemuth, and I think Gentry's proved he can block. But this is a deep tight end draft. And there are guys sitting there in the 4th and the 5th that would usually be there in the 2nd or the 3rd. At the moment, these are mock drafts. 2 of these guys are probably going to do really well at the combine, as we've talked about all their pro days. They'll rocket up the boards. But I do sit there and I wonder, and you think about a Matt Canada offense, which we all keep talking about, but we haven't quite really seen yet. You know, you could get a guy here on 3 or 4 years and really upgrade a position where you have to spend for the top guys. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a tight end, but I think you probably are needing to have to come back into the draft. I think you're going to have to use the next year's pick if you want to get one. But yeah, tight end's not as sure for me as what I think it is for some people on the board right now. And, you know, it's interesting. You talked earlier about Ben and not really using a tight end since Heath. There are a lot of other guys that do like to use a tight end. I think you look at, you know, if you talk about a Trubisky or a Mariota, those guys have traditionally worked with decent tight ends. So if you're going to bring a guy like that in, what are you giving them?
Well, if Freiermuth progresses, like I think he will, especially if they bring in some of Canada's, you know, can expand on his system with a quarterback with mobility that Ben didn't have, then I think that Freiermuth's usage will go up.
Yeah.
And Gentry showed that those little inline screens and the work in the middle, once he catches that ball, he's like trying to tackle a giraffe. You know, they have to go low because if they don't, he runs over. So I just think that if Freiermuth takes that next step in targets, and then Gentry continues to improve as a blocker, I just don't know how much you would use a third tight end.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. But like you said, there's some really talented tight ends in this class. And all the way through like the 5 rounds, the top 5 rounds. So again, if they go with like we talked about, the best player available, Freiermuth could easily be moved into the slot and used kind of like a Kelsey or a Kettle. And then you could have that, use for that other tight end.
100%.
So it could just open up. A lot of things can open up here based on the free agency, and we'll know more after the combine, of course.
Yeah, and I think you really brought up the point there about Freiermuth in the slot. That's one that I think, I'd love to see it. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. You talk about Senior Bowl, and a guy that popped on my radar that really wasn't was the tight end out of Nevada. Now, obviously, everyone knows I'm really high on Carson Strong. And, at the start of the show, you said, unless there's a quarterback you strongly believe in, and my mind's going, Carson Strong.
I'm Ritter.
Well, I'm Ritter. I know, yeah.
Because Ritter's
kind of there in the second round. Like, every
you've got
has Ritter there.
You got Willis, who's so super athletic, and then you have Strong, who throws the ball very well from the pocket. And I think Ritter, so does Pickett, but I think Ritter kind of gives you both, and he might be there in the second to, set for a year behind the bridge guy. That's in a perfect scenario. But I also like Strong, but the combine's going to tell us a lot about him too.
100%. And Ritter, really, I liked what I saw at the Senior Bowl, and you said in the BTSC Slack channel, I'm the Ritter guy. I actually thought Pickett, I know he didn't miss a throw in that Senior Bowl, but I actually wasn't impressed with what I saw at the Senior Bowl. I have in the game, I sat there going, eek, that's going to be your number one quarterback. Like, please no. And it's not about age or hand size for me. I don't necessarily think as well. But what I was going to say was what stood out to me was the chemistry between Strong and the tight end from Nevada. I think his name's Cole. I think it's Cole Turner off the top of my head. But I noticed he threw a lot of passes to him, and he wasn't a guy that really had shown up on my radar much. A lot of people, you end up focusing on Dubes from the wide receiver, Romeo Dubes from Nevada. But then I want to watch some tape on Turner, and I'm like, well, hey, no, this guy's pretty cool, like, actually. So it's thrown up, like, and it's this draft process. We've got 2 minutes left. Super Bowl tomorrow. We are on BTSC. It is happening in the NFL. Some people in the live chat have been saying they don't really care. They're not a fan. It's obviously got a divisional rival in that game. A, who do you want to see win and why? And B, who do you think will win and why?
I'll try my best to keep it short and sweet. I'm rooting for the Rams because I can never root for the Bengals.
Yeah.
Their fans would never root for the Steelers, no matter what the situation is. So if the Bengals somehow win, I'll be happy for Hilton. Some of the guys, it's more their fan base that I struggle with.
Yeah.
I think the Rams, I've got a prediction, something like 31-28.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be a good game, but I do think the Rams have the advantage. Their defensive line versus the Bengals offensive line. And then they have Ramsey, who I think will be able to – I expect Higgins to have a bigger game than Chase.
Yeah.
So, I would have to go Rams 31-28.
Great. I like the Rams to win too. I think Matt Stafford deserves a Super Bowl. I think that's just really –
And Aaron Donald.
Yeah, AAD as well, I think. And Whitworth, like, he's someone that I've watched. I actually liked Whitworth for a long time. I remember watching the, when they first went into LA after St. Louis, and I watched the Hard Knocks that year, and it was back with Jeff Fisher was the coach and all the rest of it. And Whitworth was a potential cut with his contract at that time, I think, as well. And I just remember watching this guy, and he was just really down to earth. And so you're a big fan of him. So, yeah, I'd like to see the Rams win as well. Like, I was high on this Bengals team coming into the season in terms of I thought they were going to do well. I didn't think they'd do this well so quickly. But, yeah, I do not want to see the divisional rivals get Super Bowl. I just do not want to see that. And so I think it might be sitting somewhere like a 36-29. But then I could see a low game as well. But that's sort of where I'm currently feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, I wanted to thank you very much, Shannon White, for joining us here on Steelers Touch Down Under. We'll have you on again because you didn't get the full slang treatment this week, but I had such a pleasure talking all things solid foundations, and hopefully the Steelers can find a few rocks and not find sand that washes away over the years to come. But with that, go Steelers as always. And Shannon, I think we can sign off the way you sign off your hangovers as well.
Oh, okay. Are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready.